a thunder god who faced a dragon monster, a legendary warrior who died with an arrow in the foot, and a god who will appear near the end of the world on top of a horse. It seems like I'm talking about Greek mythology and Christianity, doesn't it? But actually, I'm talking about Hinduism, the religion with over 330 million gods. If you've landed here out of the blue and are new to the channel, subscribe, because every week there's a video about mythology, dealing with topics such as creatures, gods, angels, demons, witches, and everything else. Remember to like and share the video. It helps me out a lot. Thanks. Hinduism is of Persian origin and comes from Hindu, which would be a reference to the Hindu River and the people who lived there in that region. But over time, it also became a reference to religious traditions, spiritual beliefs, and the people of India. Hinduism, in the religious sense, would be one of the first religions in the world. That is, if it's not the first, right? Because there's a debate about that. But when it comes to religions that are still practiced, even today it is the oldest, as it is the third largest religion in the world, behind only Islam and Christianity. It would have originated in Central Asia and the Indus River Valley. Followers of this religion call it Sanatana Dharma, which translated would be something more or less like the eternal order or eternal path. They understand all the practice and all the concept and follow the scriptures like the Vedas. One of the concepts is that, for example, at some point in the universe, everyone was part of the same body. I mean, not the same body, but the same soul, a kind of supreme super soul called Brahman. Brahman is the first cause and what sets everything in motion, but it is also in motion. It guides the entire course of creation and creation itself. There are various interpretations of Hinduism. Depending on the way you think, you can fit it into different things. For example, you could say that Hinduism would be monotheistic, since everything would come from the same God, from the same supreme being, polytheistic, since there are several avatars of this same God, and even an atheist could end up fitting into Hinduism, since he could think of Brahman as being himself and find a better version of himself. So you must be thinking, right? What about Shiva and Vishnu? We'll discuss that, but first let's calm down and take it one step at a time. Well, in this view then, we would have Brahman as the supreme deity, and it divided itself into some very important gods, which are Brahman, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. They would form the Hindu trinity called Trimurti. However, the religion has not always been this way. For example, the Vedas were written roughly from 1500 to 500 before Christ in the Vedic period. And during this period, we had the primitive version of Hinduism called Vedic religion. From Vedic religion, it moved on to Brahmanism, which is what I'm telling you about, right? The religion focused on Brahma. And then would come the hybrid Hinduism, which would end up combining some concepts from the new religions. There wasn't that person who said what they can or cannot do. The concepts of the Vedas were passed on to the scribes, according to legend, by Brahma himself. So they simply recorded what has always existed. This eternal knowledge, known as Shruti, which would be what is heard, is recorded in the Vedas in its most well-known sections, such as the Samhitas, Aranyakas, Brahmanas, and the Upanishads. It's one of them addressing faith in a different way. All these works are completed by another type of writing, which is known as Samhiti, which means what is remembered. And it talks about stories showing how humans would have to behave in the face of faith. These stories include the Puranas, which are the Hindu epics. The most well-known would be the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. There are also the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. But it's important to know that none of these scriptures that I mentioned here can be considered a Hindu Bible. This is because none of them are described as being the Word of God. In fact, they would be kind of the revelation of truth, that which shows that the universe would be rational and controlled by the supreme mind or by the supreme soul, super soul, which is the essence of all living beings are part of. The purpose in life then would be for you to recognize the essential unity of the universe. And for you to do this, you would have to reach your higher self, your highest self, which is called Atman. And there is a certain guide to be followed for you to achieve this. There is Dharma, which is living the right way, and there is Karma, which is acting the right way. By doing this, you would escape the cycle of eternal reincarnation, the so-called samsara, and you would finally unite with the supreme entity. Saying this, you must have noticed a certain similarity of Hinduism with Buddhism. Many people end up confusing the two, but they are quite different. In Buddhism, there is a well-established founder, Siddhartha Gautama, the first Buddha. And there are no gods in Buddhism. There are beings that end up being elevated and all, but they are not gods. Hinduism, on the other hand, has several. However, Buddha is in Hinduism, but in a different way, which I will explain later. What would lead a person to get lost on this path would be the belief that there is not a unity, but a duality. In other words, that the beings around her, other people, and even the Creator himself are something else, not the same being. This thought, which is called Maya, is usually caused by the physical world, by another physical person. But when the individual realizes how similar he is to other beings and to the Creator himself, he is able to reach his state of self-realization and be enlightened to the Supreme Soul. Let's discuss the stories I've mentioned, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Bhagavad Gita. Of course, I'm going to tell it in a very summarized way, okay? Making a brief summary here because the stories are huge, so I wouldn't be able to bring them here for you in a video. But starting with the Mahabharata, it's about a family war. Actually, a war between two groups from the same family. And it's the Pandavas and the Kauravas who are fighting for the throne of Hastinapura. The story also addresses parallel stories in addition to the war. Mahabharata would have been dictated by Krishna Devapayana, or also called Vyasa. He told the whole story, and it was written by Ganesha, who is the god with an elephant head. This epic poem is massive, spanning 100,000 verses. It's the longest poem in history, which they say was written around the year 4 before Christ, and all this epic event occurs on the Indian subcontinent. It is simply one of the most important texts in all of Indian literature. The Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata, consisting of a discourse that occurs during the war, and it is delivered by the god Krishna, one of the most important characters in Hinduism. Krishna was walking there with a warrior named Arjuna. Arjuna becomes very sad at one point, as he doesn't want to fight against his own family, whether he likes it or not. Then Krishna gives him a whole speech, explaining why he should be calm, saying that the people he would kill would not really die, because the soul is immortal, and so on. Then Arjuna ends up getting excited again and goes to war. In summary, that would be it. The Ramayana, written in the 5th century, has 24,000 verses, making it a very long story as well, and basically focuses on palace problems and war with demons. Our story's protagonist would be Rama, the prince of Ayodhya, who ended up being exiled and returned home later. In the middle of the story, a demon named Ravana ends up kidnapping Rama's wife, who is Sita, and we end up seeing the prince's journey to save his wife. Let's start then talking about some gods, starting with perhaps the most famous one, which is the elephant-headed god, Ganesha. But before that, it's good to remind you that the stories I'm going to tell here have several versions. So if you see one very different from what I'm going to tell you, don't be alarmed. With that said, let's go. Ganesha is the god of many things, including promising beginnings. So much so that whenever a devotee is about to start a new venture, he makes an offering to the elephant-headed god. And you will also see his image in front of temples. This is because, according to the legend itself, Ganesha started out as a kind of guard, a kind of security for his mother, who was Parvati. Some stories place Ganesha as the son of Shiva and Parvati, while in others, because Shiva is an ascetic and somewhat celibate as well, they place him as having been born only from Parvati and her sweat. But regardless of how he was born, they say that at the time of birth, Shiva was far away, doing his prayers and everything else. And one day, Parvati went to take a bath and asked her son to stand at the door there to prevent any pervert from showing up. But on that same day, Shiva decided to return home, and he didn't know Ganesha, and Ganesha didn't know him. When Shiva arrived home, he wanted to see his wife, but Ganesha blocked his path, refusing to let him pass. Of course, Shiva was furious. How dare that kid say that to him? Shiva told Ganesha that if he didn't let him pass, he would get a smack in the mouth. But Ganesha stood firm, saying he would not let Shiva pass under any circumstances and that Shiva could try and see. And he really ended up seeing, didn't he? He ended up seeing his head explode because Shiva ended up opening a bit of his third eye, which was enough to finish off the boy. Parvati ended up hearing everything that happened and came running, scolded Shiva, saying that he had just blown up the head of his own son. Shiva was a bit confused, but Parvati explained to him that the one lying on the floor was born from her sweat. In short, he was Shiva's son. So Shiva searched the world for the head of the first thing he encountered. The first thing he saw was an elephant. He took its head and put it on his son. He started moving again because he hadn't died, because all Hindu gods are indeed immortal. In another story, there was a race between the gods. So everyone went to get their respective mounts. In this case, Brahma had his swan, or peacock, called Hansa. Shiva had his bull, which was Nandi. Indra had his white elephant, Aravata. Vishnu had Garuda, which was his bird. And finally, Ganesha arrived, who was riding on his little mouse. And of course, everyone seeing that chubby kid on top of a mouse started to laugh. They said he would lose. But when the race started, Ganesha circled his parents, who were Parvati and Shiva, and stopped. The first to finish the lap around the world was Kartikeya, who was Ganesha's brother. But as soon as he went to receive his prizes and celebrations, Ganesha raised his trunk and said that in fact, he was the one who had won. Because since he had gone around his parents, who were considered the incarnation of the universe, he had won. Everyone agreed, and Ganesha won, becoming the god of wisdom. Indra is the god of thunder, and he has some characteristics, at least when it comes to his story, that are very similar to other thunder gods out there. He is also the son of Prithvi, the earth goddess, and Jaus, the sky god. He also ends up facing a snake or a dragon in his story. In Vedic times, he was the supreme god, but with the arrival of Brahmanism, he lost prominence to Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. I tell a story that a man named Tivashtar hated Indra very much and wanted in some way to end his post and take all the power for himself. And thinking about that, he called his son, who had 3 heads, and made him start to grow in size nonstop, to a point where he might occupy all the space in the universe and take it over. Indra found out about this, and he had to take action because that man would end up becoming so big that he would end up swallowing him. So he goes to where this man is. One is reading some scriptures, another eating. So he slowly approaches that head that was looking at the scriptures and throws his lightning bolt at it. That bolt was so powerful it could end up turning the Himalayas into dust. Devastar ends up receiving the news that his son had been killed, and to get revenge, he goes to his room that has various enchantments and potions and ends up creating a giant serpent called Vritra, made especially to end Indra. When the two meet, a huge battle ensues, and at a certain point in the fight, Indra realizes that everything has gone dark, and that's because Vritra had swallowed him. But luckily that dragon ends up opening its mouth to yawn, and Indra runs away from there. He goes to ask for help from Vishnu, who says that at the right moment, a weapon would appear for Indra, and he could end that dragon. But there was a problem, because the serpent could not be killed by any weapon that was made of stone, wood, or iron, and the weapon could not be wet or dry. But while Indra was walking along the beach, he ends up receiving a sword that was made of foam, which was as hard as any weapon, and it was neither dry nor wet. He ends up meeting Vritra, and this time he ends up defeating the dragon, cutting off its head. This is one version of the story, but there is another, probably Vedic, that says that Indra was born especially to kill Vritra, who had taken all the water in the world. Indra, intoxicated with a large dose of soma, charges unstoppably towards the dragon. And he says, "Peace, Vritra, all the water falls back onto the world." Then, the other detail about Indra, it says that because of a curse, he has 1,000 vaginas on his body, or 1,000 testicles. The Ganges River, which is the most important Hindu river, also has a legend about it. According to the story, a woman named Sumati, who was the wife of a very important king, or one of the wives, ended up giving birth to a pumpkin. And this pumpkin in turn gave birth to 60,000 sons. Meanwhile, another wife of the king gave birth to Zamanja, who, being very evil, ended up being expelled from the palace. One day, the king decided to make a grand sacrifice of a white horse. But this horse ended up being kidnapped by a Rakshasa, which is a Hindu demon, who took the horse underground. The king called his 60,000 sons and sent them to retrieve the horse. They began to dig the earth, dig, until finally they found the horse. But behind him was also the Rakshasa, who unleashed a flood of fire that killed 60,000 men. Tired of waiting for the horse, the king asked for the grandson of his evil son to see what had happened. When he arrived at the location, he only saw the burned bodies of all those men, and since there wasn't a large enough river to perform a funeral ritual for them, Garuda, who was Vishnu's mount, appeared to the boy and told him that he should ask for the daughter of the Himalayas, Ganga, because only she had enough water for 60,000 men. But Ganga wasn't very willing to help. In fact, it took many years until someone finally managed to convince her. A man named Bhagirath was doing penance in the Himalayas and asking for the help of Brahma. And when God appears to him, because of all the penance he had done, he grants him a wish. He asked Brahma to convince Ganga to give her waters, but the Creator God told him that if that was his request, it was better for him to ask this of Shiva, who was the only God who could convince her. Bhagirath then changes his prayers to the god of destruction, who goes to Ganga and manages to convince her. The daughter of the Himalayas says it wouldn't be a good idea, because her waters falling from that height could end the world. But Shiva told her to be calm, because he would receive them with his hair. Finally, the Ganges River emerges, allowing the 60,000 men to perform their proper rituals. Let's now discuss the Trimurti, the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who maintain the universe's cycle. The cycle in this case would be one to destroy, one to create, and the other to maintain its balance. Religiously speaking, all three have the same power, with none being the strongest or the weakest. However, depending on the story, it may end up implying that one is weaker than the other. For example, there are stories where Shiva is said to be the only one capable of defeating the enemy. In others, it would be Vishnu, and in others, Brahma. And there are other branches of the religion, such as Shaivism, which places Shiva as the main one. But as a rule, all three have the same power. Vishnu, the preserver, has the duty to protect human beings and restore the order of the world if something happens. They say that every aspect of the world has the presence of Vishnu, recognizing him as the divine being from which all beings emerged. He appears in various texts, and sometimes even, probably in older texts, being a minor deity. In his appearances, he is always floating in a primordial ocean and on top of a 1,000-headed serpent called Shesha, who protects him while he is sleeping. Vishnu also has 4 arms. In each one he is holding a divine object, an energy disc, a conch, a lotus, and a staff. As I've said before, he has a mount which is a bird called Garuda. Vishnu has appeared on earth a few times, but he was in the form of his avatars, which would be his incarnations. They always appear when the earth is at a critical moment, when a catastrophe is about to happen. The number varies, but some say there are 10 or 12. For example, the first one would be a fish, which is called Matsya, who appeared to a man warning him that a flood would happen and that he should build a vessel. Then he even ends up helping this man reach a safe place. The other avatar would be Virara, who is a boar, who appeared when a demon was holding the earth that had just been created under the waters. The boar goes down there, defeats the demon, and brings the earth to the surface, carrying it on his tusks. There are several avatars, which I've covered in a video on this channel. Check the card in description for the link if you're interested. There are interesting avatars, such as Buddha himself, who is Siddhartha Gautama. He would be an incarnation of Vishnu on earth, at a time when society there was in great need of help. Besides Buddha, there are 2 other avatars that I think are worth mentioning here, which are Krishna and the last avatar of Vishnu, who hasn't even appeared on earth yet. He will only appear when necessary, which is Kalki, who is a knight, a man riding a horse. About Krishna, he was sent by Vishnu because his uncle, who was Kansa, was ruling there and was harming everyone. As soon as Krishna was born, they tried to kill him several times. One of his wet nurses ended up poisoning her breasts, But Krishna didn't just suckle the milk, but her vital energy, and she ended up dying. A demon bird tried to crush him while he was in the cradle, but who ended up crushed was the demon itself. Another tried to seize and lift him into the skies, but the baby started growing rapidly, causing the demon to become desperate and release the child. When the demon fell, he was crushed by a rock. Krishna and his brother Balarama defeated their uncle. Krishna participated in the Mahabharata, where he delivered the Bhagavad Gita discourse to Arjuna. He convinced him to keep fighting in the battle. And one detail is that Krishna died because of an accidental arrow shot in his feet, very similar to Achilles from Greek mythology. Krishna ascended and ended up joining his higher self, which was Vishnu. Brahma is the god of creation. It is not certain how he came about, whether it was from a seed or a lotus flower from Vishnu's navel. But after he appeared, he created the entire universe and everything in it. Brahma usually appears with 4 heads, which symbolize the sacred texts of the Vedas, the 4 yugas, which are epochs of time, and the 4 varnas, which are the Hindu social classes. Brahma appears wearing white robes, holding a scepter, a bow, an alms bowl, and various other things. His mount is the swan or peacock called Hansa. Brahma's wife is Sarasvati, and in this case, as I had forgotten to mention, Vishnu's wife is Lakshmi. But returning to Brahma, he is said to have created Sarasvati from a part of his own body. He was so in love with her that he couldn't take his eyes off her, and she became very embarrassed and began to run away and hide. And to keep up with her, Brahma created 3 more heads. And over time and through conversation, Sarasvati lost her shyness and finally united with Brahma. They also say that Brahma actually had 5 heads, but one of them ended up being destroyed by Shiva after Brahma disrespected him. Since I mentioned him, let's discuss Shiva, the god of destruction. He already has an entire video here on the channel, so in a way I'm going to summarize here. Shiva is the destroyer, but that doesn't mean he symbolizes something bad. For Hindus, destruction is just a part of the cycle of renewal. Therefore, he represents goodness, asceticism, but he is also the leader of evil spirits and ghosts. He is represented in many different ways. He usually has several arms and 3 eyes. His 3rd eye is capable of destroying everything in front of him, even the universe or the gods. He wears the kokari, a necklace made of snakes, and is blue in color due to the poison he took to save humanity. He is usually also seen dancing, performing the Tandava, which is the dance of destruction, creation, and preservation. Shiva has the trident, which is called Trishula, that cuts through anything physically or spiritually. He also possesses the Parchupatastra, a weapon capable of destroying universes, and like Vishnu, he has avatars as well. One example is Hanuman, the monkey-shaped god who nearly swallowed the sun. And once, Shiva ended up receiving powers from all the gods to defeat a demon, but he didn't return them afterwards, because if nobody asked, why would he return them, right? He is married to his beloved wife, who is Parvati, who in turn is also an extremely powerful goddess. And there are other forms, such as the goddess Durga, who is the goddess of 100,000 arms, who also ended up receiving powers from other gods, and Kali, who is the destroyer, who emerged after Durga or Parvati, depending on the version, lost control in a battle and began to practice the Tandava. And she almost destroyed the universe, if it weren't for Shiva, who jumped under her and stopped all that dance, avoiding a catastrophe. But these are just some gods. There are many and almost infinite. As mentioned earlier, Kartikeya is the god of war. Other gods include Agni, the god of fire, and Varuna, the god of the seas, among many others. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. Thanks, bye. See you